Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video we have two main goals. First we're going to create a user model and then we're going to import and configure Passport. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and shut that down so it doesn't get confusing. Inside of our models we already created user.js, but let's go ahead and set that up. So first we need Mongoose. Const Mongoose equals require Mongoose. And then we actually have to import one of the special supplementary packages we used, const passport local mongoose equals require passport local mongoose. And again, you could call this anything you wanted. If you wanted to, you could call it PLM or something like that, but I like to be as explicit as possible. And then we're going to set up a user schema, const user schema equals new mongoose.schema. And then after we're done setting that up, we're going to module.exports equals mongoose.model. And this is all review, that's why I'm going quickly. User schema. This is stuff we've done several times before. We did this with comics, we did this with comments, we've done it before. So up until now, this is review. Now comes the new stuff. First, I want to show you a new syntax that you can use whenever creating schema to add additional options. So let's say that on our user, we want an email address, and we want a username, and we want a password. Now the way that Passport works is that you do not put the actual passport here. We're actually going to add that in just a second. You don't add the passport in here, we're going to stick it down right here. So we want the email, and this is just going to be a string. So we used to do string, comma, and username would be a string. That's how we used to do it, and that still works just fine, but we want to add additional information on here. For our email, we're going to pass an object. Inside of that object, we're going to have a few items. Type equals string, and that makes sense because it is a string. But then we've got a couple options. Required is true. What this means is that if you don't pass an email whenever you're creating this, it'll throw an error and it will not create. This is useful for whenever you have information that people have to have and you don't want to accidentally create it on the back end without having that information, such as an email or a username or a password or something. And then unique is true as well. And this does exactly what you would think. Before it creates it, it's going to query the database, say, hey, is this unique or does somebody already have this? If somebody already has this, it's going to throw an error. So we're going to do the exact same thing with the username. So I'm just going to copy this and put it down here because the username is going to be a string, it's going to be required, and it also has to be unique because we don't want any duplicated emails or usernames. So that's just new syntax where you can pass additional options. Now we want to come down here, and this is where we add the passport stuff. User schema.plugin is passport local mongoose. What this is doing is this is taking the stuff from Passport Local Mongoose and adding it to our user schema. This is all code that somebody else wrote that we don't have to, we didn't have to write, we didn't have to do anything with. Somebody else wrote it, and all we're doing is plugging it into our user schema. Make sure that you plug it in before you create your model using that schema. So there's that, and that's it. User model is done. It's been created, it's good to go. The next thing we have to do is update our app.js to incorporate some of those new things. So first, we're going to do passport. Const passport equals require passport. We're also going to need express session. Const express session equals require express session. And finally, we're going to need that user model we just created. Const user equals require /models/user. All right, so now that we've got those imported, we have to actually configure them. And there's two configuration sections I want to do. First, I want to do the express session config, and then I want to do the passport config. Express session is actually very straightforward to configure. App.use, and then express session, passing in an object of options. Now there are three options that we are going to use. Only one of them is required, but the other two are going to make our life a little bit easier. First option is secret. The secret is used basically kind of like a key whenever you are creating the session cookies. So this just needs to be a string of whatever you want it to be. It can be anything you like. It can be random gibberish, things like that. It can be a phrase, it can be numbers, anything you want. Just make sure that if you're doing this in the real world that no one can access your Express session secret, because then they would be able to forge cookies and do a lot of nefarious things. This doesn't really matter what this is as long as it is relatively long, and it's better if it's kind of random. So don't just put like movie quotes or anything like that. So I'm just going to smash my fingers on the keyboard for a little bit. There we go, good enough. Now these next two options are resave, which is going to be false, and save uninitialized, UNINITIALIZED. Both of those are going to be set to false. I'm not going to get into what these do. Look at the documentation for more information, but they just make our app work better. It makes it a little bit more stable. So there's the Express session configuration, and now the Passport configuration. Passport is a little bit more to it, but it's also not too terribly complex. App.use passport.initialize. Call it as a function. This just does exactly what you think. It initializes Passport. Then we need to do app.use passport.session, called as a function. What this does is it allows persistent sessions. Forgot my semicolon. So this allows us to actually have the sessions persist even if the user leaves the page and comes back. And then passport.serialize user. Make sure I spelled that right. And then that's a method, and we're user.serialize, CRIALIZEUSER, called as a function. What this does is this encodes data into the session, and it comes from Passport local Mongoose is where that comes from. And we're also going to do Passport deserialize user. And it's passed the exact same user.deserialize user, called as a function. And this decodes data from the session. And this is also from Passport local Mongoose. Deserialize user. I know unexpected identifier. Let's see. Ooh, passport dot. There we go. I knew there's an error somewhere. Whenever your IDE is flashing red, bad things generally happen. And then we're actually going to do something a little strange. Right now, this is just boilerplate crap that you have to do. App.use. There we go. This is just boilerplate crap that you have to use in order to kind of configure Passport. This is going to be the same almost every time you use this. If you're interested in why this is, what these things are doing, if you want more information, just read the documentation. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into it right now. And then we need to get our local strategy. I forgot to import Passport local up here. So after Passport, const passport local equals require passport dash local. So now we have passport local imported. Down here we want to create a local strategy is what it's called. Const local strategy equals passport local dot strategy. And this is basically just the strategy we are going to use in order to authenticate users. It's the local strategy because we are using Passport local. If we were using Passport Google, you might import this as Passport Google strategy or something like that. But it's just because we're using local, and that's why I named it that. And then we want to actually use it. Passport.use new local strategy, passing in user.authenticate. We are done with the Passport configuration. Now, I know that was a lot, and you probably don't understand what the vast majority of this does. That is perfectly fine. That's not a problem. That's okay. You don't have to. All you have to know is that these are the things that are required to make Passport work. We are initializing it. We are allowing persistent sessions. This is the code that's used to encode data into the session. This is the one that's used to decode data from the session. And then we are creating a strategy. This one is a local strategy because we're using Passport local, and then we are using that strategy inside of Passport. That's what those are doing. Don't fret over exactly what they're doing. In this video, we created a user model in order to store our user data inside of the database. We then imported and configured Express Session, and then imported and configured Passport. There is a lot of boilerplate for Passport especially, but it's the kind of thing that you just do it once and then copy paste it into all of your other projects, and you don't have to worry about it unless you need some sort of specific functionality. For example, using a different strategy instead of the local strategy, you would use different options, but all of that is in the documentation. In the next video, we're going to set up the routes and a form in order to create users. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to help. Thanks.